Hello and welcome to my channel. In today's video I will be going over my ProQuest Singapore Week 2 recap where I played MAXX the Hype Nitro. This video will be divided into two parts. The first part will go over the deck itself and the second part will be a recap of both ProQuests I participated in. Starting off with the deck itself, here is the main board presented on the left and the sideboard presented on the right. A description to the deck will be available in the comments below. There's no major changes I made from last week except for the fact that I cut out the entire Bankbreaker package, which saved me a few extra slots to put in some tech cards to improve some other matchups. Beginning with the equipment, I did not want to play Bankbreaker this time around. This meant that there was no real reason to play Banksy, and because I wasn't playing Banksy, there was no real reason to play Clampress. This ended up saving me about 7 slots, including the weapon slot, so I ended up replacing the weapon for Teklo Plasma Pistol and ended up adding Adaptive Plating to the sideboard. Pistol ended up being a really good choice because it has game plan into Fatigue, Wizards, and Aggro. Because Pistol allows you to filter cards, if your opponent is not threatening you with anything, you're simply able to filter your entire hand out and then attack for 2. Into Wizards, Pistol is especially useful because it means that you get to save out on resources, and because you can load on Pistol and then attack on a future turn, you really get to bank out on that attack and gain value from it at a later point in time. And all of this also holds true for aggro, especially the part where you can load on Pistol early into the game and then send it at your opponent at a later point in time. Adaptive Plating is mainly there for Acilio and Verdance. Because you are not constructing Nitro Mechanoid in those matchups, you need a good way to block out the physical damage they're sending at you, and Adaptive Plating is great at that because it blocks for 3. Going into the deck itself, apart from cutting out Construct Bankbreaker and Clampress, there are no major changes from last week. Cutting out those 2 cards ended up giving me 6 slots, for which I added in 1 Blue Throttle to round out the blue count in the main deck, and in the sideboard I added in 2 Disillusion Sphere, mainly for Florian because it eats up all of their rune chants, and in certain scenarios it can also act as a yellow pitch when needed. I also ended up adding in 2 copies of Teklo Pounder, which is mainly for Wizards and Fatigue because it allows your attacks to become stronger and makes it so that your opponent has a harder time blocking them. Teklo Pounder is also a blue, which is relevant for pitching into Arcane Barrier. Moving on to a deck discussion itself, it is unfortunately not a good time for MAXX. The meta staunchly seems centered around Aurora, Florian, and Jarl, all of whom are not great matchups for MAXX. Aurora needs no introduction. She is one of the best decks in the format right now because of her ability to present mixed damage in the form of physical damage and arcane damage. In addition, she has access to strong attacks such as all of her 0-for-4s, Enlighten Strike, Exude Confidence, and so on, while also having access to good equipment. This ultimately means that Aurora has a pretty good capability to snowball if you ever let her keep 3 or 4 or even 5 cards in her hand. For MAXX itself, this means that it is not too great of a matchup. MAXX unfortunately does not block well because he does not have access to any defense reaction cards, and once you construct Nitro Mechanoid, which you need to do to compete with Aurora on damage, you lose out on your Arcane Barrier, which Aurora can take advantage of by playing cards like Burn Up Shock, Sigil of Suffering, and her specialization Arc Lightning. Florian. There's 2 main Florian decks in the meta right now, those being Midrange Florian and Rune Chant Stack or OTK or Combo Florian. Midrange Florian is a surprisingly decent matchup for MAXX. Of course, as with Aurora, once you construct Nitro Mechanoid, you lose out on your Arcane Barrier, which means they can run you down with arcane damage. But into Midrange Florian, they no longer have a good time to use their chess piece because you can simply choose not to attack with Nitro Mechanoid on the turn they are blocking with Barkskin of the Millennium Tree. It is still a slow and grindy matchup where every point of damage matters, but it has become a lot easier since you really get to dictate the flow of the game and the pace of play. On the other hand, Runechant Stack Florian or OTK Florian is not a good matchup for MAXX. The The Florian deck relies on blocking out any sort of damage the opponent presents, while building up a whole bunch of rune chants and eventually finishing off the opponent with a single attack, destroying all the rune chants and dealing a billion arcane damage to the opponent. As mentioned earlier, Max loses out on his arcane barrier when he makes Nitro Mechanoid, so Florian pretty much has free reign to attack and win the game at any point in time. And unfortunately, none of Max's attacks are strong enough to really get past Florian's defenses if they are on that OTK and Runechant stack strategy. While cards like Disillusion Sphere do help out in this matchup, they're simply not enough to deal with all of the things Florian is presenting at you. And then the final difficult matchup for Max is Jarl. Jarl has been one of the hardest matchups for Max since his release because of his ability to destroy equipment, as well as him being able to use strong cards such as Channel Lake Frigid and Oakenold. Since Enigma has left, Jarl has become a lot more popular because Jarl had a pretty terrible matchup into Enigma. And now, Jarl also is a great spot for Count Your Blessings, which Max has an even harder time dealing with. Count Your Blessings means that you are effectively playing against a 70 health hero, and Nitro Mechanoid and your attacks simply don't have enough gas in them to deal with that much health. Overall, Max is not in a great spot right now. You're still going to be able to win some games, but you are going to have a pretty difficult time into any of the meta heroes, and every game is going to feel like you're clawing your way towards victory. Going into the tournaments themselves, this week I participated in 2 ProQuests, one on Saturday and one on Sunday. Starting with the first ProQuest on Saturday, April 26th, this was a 19-player ProQuest which we played across 5 rounds. Players with records of 4-1 and above, or 3-2 with good breakers, made it into top 8. On the right, you can see the hero breakdown, and unsurprisingly, Aurora, Jarl, and Nu were the most represented heroes, with Florian being a close second. Round 1 was up against Ira Scarlet Avenger, and while this is not a difficult matchup for Max, I unfortunately made a pretty crucial misplay during this game. My opponent played a CNC attacking for 7, and I only blocked for 6, which meant that my arsenal, which had Construct Nitro Mechanoid in it, was destroyed. From that point on, I was forced into a loop of blocking with as many cards as I could afford to, waiting for that second copy of Nitro Mechanoid to show up. But by the time I saw it and made Nitro Mechanoid, it was too late. My deck was running low, and my opponent was able to take the game by fatiguing me. Round 2 was up against Nu Alluring Desire. This is not a difficult matchup for Max as long as you are able to avoid any sort of pesky on-hits, such as Bonds of Agony and Persuasive Prognosis. Thankfully, my opponent was not too familiar into the matchup, and I was able to make Nitro Mechanoid pretty early, and my opponent was not running any sort of shred-style effects either, meaning I had free reign to block with Mechanoid whenever needed. I was able to take this game down pretty cleanly. Round 3 was up against Count Your Blessings Jarl. This is, as I've discussed already, one of Max's worst matchups, and this game showed exactly why. Because Jarl has so many tools available into you, this matchup is already difficult, and Count Your Blessings is just the additional cherry on top. My opponent ended this game at 30 life, and by that point, both my deck and Nitro Mechanoid were completely out of cards. My opponent was able to simply walk over me from that point on. Round 4 was up against another Count Your Blessing Jarl, and this time, thankfully, I was able to take it down. I essentially only attacked when I needed to in this case, which was mainly through filtering cards with Pistol and saving Nitro Mechanoid for as late as possible, not making it until I absolutely needed to. And from that point on, I was able to take the game down with a pretty clutch gas up turn. The final round of the day and the deciding round of the day was up against Aurora Shooting Star. If I had won this matchup, I would be in top 8, and if I lost, I was out of top 8 contention. During this game, my opponent had some pretty great hands and was able to present essentially 2 back-to-back Arc Lightning turns, and both of my hands during that time were all reds. My opponent simply had enough damage and simply was aware of the matchup enough to able to run me down, and I unfortunately had no ways of dealing with everything my opponent was presenting at me. Overall record for the day was 2-3. Pretty happy with those results overall, especially considering I was playing into 2 CYB Jarls and 1 Aurora, and barring that misplay, I was not too bummed about any of my losses. The following day I played in a 24-player ProQuest, which we played across 5 rounds. Players earning records of 4-1 and above, or 3-2 with good breakers, made it to top 8, and on the right you can see the hero breakdown, with Aurora being the most represented hero at 5 wins. Round 1 was up against Victor Goldmane, High and Mighty, and as I've discussed previously, this is not a difficult matchup for MAXX. Victor really gives you the space to build your board and set up, with your main goal being to deal enough damage to them that once you make Nitro Mechanoid, you are simply able to overwhelm them with everything else that you are throwing at them. Thankfully in this matchup, my opponent went down to 27 before I constructed Nitro Mechanoid, and I was able to simply take the game from there. Round 2 was up against Acilio, and in this matchup I was really grateful to bring both Teclo Pounder and Adaptive Plating. Teclo Pounder really helped push my attacks over the edge and deal that extra damage into Acilio, while Adaptive Plating was helpful in blocking some of Acilio's pesky attacks. Unfortunately, I made a pretty critical misplay in this game, where my opponent returned a Sigil of Aether to their hand during my turn, and I took the arcane damage, not realizing that this would trigger Channel Lightning Valley, allowing them to draw an extra card. From that point on, the game was pretty simple for them, and they were able to take it down. Round 3 was up against Kano. This is not a difficult matchup for MAXX, especially considering that you are running Teclo Pounder. Because Kano only has 30 health, the onus is on them to block and play a more defensive game plan, while you can simply throw attacks at them and they will eventually be forced to leak damage through, allowing you to win. The key thing to remember in this matchup is to avoid spending all of your resources, especially during your turn when you don't need to. Because Kano plays best on his opponent's turn, you want to make sure that you are able to anticipate what your opponent could be sending at you, and as always, be sure to block any of the crucial cards they have, such as Lesson in Lava. Round 4, and the deciding match of the day, was up against Aurora Shooting Star. If I win this matchup, I would be in top 8, while if I had lost it, I would have been out of top 8 contention. And this was a very close matchup. I thankfully was able to get out Construct Nitro Mechanoid pretty early, and from that point on, it's a game of avoiding the damage they throw at you, while being able to deal enough damage to them to make sure that they are not able to send as much back at you. I did end the game on 1 life, which was very close, and I was able to take it down, locking me in for top 8. Round 5 was up against Jarl. I was not looking forward to this matchup at all, and I was also pretty hungry at that point, so I just decided to concede, take an early lunch, and prepare for my top 8 match. Going into top 8, I was 8th seed, and I was matched up against the 1st seed player, who was on Prism, Awakener of Soul. This can be a very swingy matchup for MAXX. Prism has access to great numbers through her weapon and her heralds, while MAXX is not running too many poppers, and if your opponent is on any sort of Angelic Wrath or any sort of other effects like that, this matchup can become very difficult for you. Unfortunately as well, I did not see a single copy of Nitro Mechanoid, and my opponent was just able to run me down with their heralds, while also being able to build up a massive board of Figments and Angels. My record for the day was 3 wins and 3 losses, or 3 wins and 2 losses if you ignore top 8, and my overall record for the weekend was 5 wins and 6 losses, or 5 wins and 5 losses if you ignore top 8. Overall, I am pretty happy with my performance. This is clearly not MAXX's meta. A lot of the meta decks have good game plans into him, but I'm still happy I was able to win out on half of the games I played. I am still looking forward to High Seas, and I'm hoping it brings MAXX the tools he really needs. And with all of that being said, thanks for watching.